staff room, so people who are unable to attend today will be able to listen back at the recording. So I'd like to welcome Andy Bertram, who's the Director of Finance and the Executive Director Sponsor for the Enable Staff Network. And Andy's going to open the event after I've gone through some of the housekeeping, and then I'll give the closing remarks. In terms of accessibility, if everybody can, please can you stay on mute just to eliminate any background noise. If anybody needs to use live captions, then these can be activated by clicking on the 3 dots at the top of your screen. If you need to pin the speaker to the screen, then you can use your mouse to hover over the speaker, right click on their picture, and then select pin for me. We do understand that people might need to move around whilst they're in this event, so please feel free to stand up and move as appropriate for yourself. If you can keep your camera on, that would be great, but if not, we do understand that not everybody wants to have their camera on, so please turn the camera off. We thought it would be important just to clarify what we're talking about in terms of disability. So there are 2 main models of disability. One of those models is the medical model of disability, and that's about how we see the individual and the condition and or illness and the barriers to them participating in society and work. So often the focus is on them and their illness, rather than what we like to use is a social model, where we actually look at what are the barriers in society that impact on individuals and stop them from participating in society and in employment. So these models can influence our worldview and the approach to how we treat people in and out of work. So the more acceptable model to follow is the social model. Now we've included people who are neurodivergent within this listening event. Neurodivergency is not an illness. It's just a different way that the brain functions, or the way that people process information and learn. The only time it might be seen as a disability is that when society puts barriers in place for those people who are neurodivergent. Although neurodivergence is included and protected under the Equality Act, it's not necessarily classed as a disability. It's just about society putting barriers in place so those people are seen as disabled. So what we'll do is go to Andy's opening remarks, and then we'll move on to the first speaker. Over to you, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Virginia. Good afternoon, everybody. I do know most people on the call, but welcome to anybody who might be watching the recording of this as well. If you don't know me, I'm Andy Bertram, the Trust's Finance Director, and I'm the exec sponsor for the Enable network. So my job's to speak up for the network, help unblock stuff, and to help raise the profile. I've also got the keys to the Trust's safe. Now, there's a lot of money in there, but there's a little bit of money in there. Because I am acutely aware that sometimes it takes a bit of resource in the form of money to unblock things and to move things on. And notwithstanding our financial pressures, sometimes we are able to do that. And clearly I'm in a position to be able to help oil the wheels there and to move things forward. And to act as a clear advocate for the network through those capital programme discussions. I've used my director blog as well to promote the network. I've no idea how far the blog reaches, but occasionally I get, in fact, more than occasionally actually, I often get surprised in conversation, pleasantly surprised in conversation with people who reference something that's been said in the blog. And I fully intend to continue to do that. And I would encourage anybody from the network or associated with the network, you have an open platform through me to use and to access that blog. Well, there are people here who've done just that. So that's definitely a reminder. Please do that. I'm on a journey to kind of better understand, and I've some way to go yet, but the various initiatives that the network have promoted and supported are hugely helping along that way. And it's a journey I certainly plan to continue on. Today's about listening, giving us all a valuable insight into hearing firsthand about lived experiences of some of our colleagues. I want to say a massive thank you to anybody who's agreed to speak today. It's a big deal to speak up. So thank you for doing that. And my ask of others on the call, and my ask of those who are watching the recording of this, is to, in the words of Michael West, some of us were exposed to Michael West just recently in a session on compassionate leadership with the Trust. And Michael West talked about listening with fascination. So that's the ask. Listen with fascination today, and then take time to reflect on what you've heard, and think about how we all individually and jointly can improve the experience of our colleagues and of our patients that access our services. So thank you, Virginia, for letting me just say a few words at the start, and I will hand back to you. I'm looking forward to what we're about to hear. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andy. So what we'll do now is go to Azaria. So Azaria is one of the committee members for the Enable Staff Network, and we have asked some members if they would like to share their personal experiences of being disabled in relation to the theme. And some people wanted to share their experiences, but they wanted to stay anonymous. So Azaria has kindly offered to read their experiences out at this event. So I'll hand over to Azaria. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. Yes, so as Virginia said, we've got 3 stories here, 3 experiences, one to do with neurodivergence, one to do with blindness, and one to do with a physical disability. There's also a couple of quotes at the end, so I sort of opened my inbox for people to send me whatever they wanted to be said, and we got a lot of quotes in the end. I'll be reading all of these from the perspective of I, just because of how they've been written. I'm not all of these things. So yeah, I've also switched screens, so hopefully you can see my lips a little bit better if that's something you rely on. So experience number 1 is neurodivergent. I've been working since 2010 with 10 years service and heritage before I moved over to the NHS, working in a Band 2 position for the last 3.5 years. Academically, I've always been successful, having gained 2 degrees without too much effort at a decent high grade. Professionally, I've always struggled to advance beyond entry-level positions, despite being more than capable for the role. I was told in interviews that I was too nervous, too brief, not confident enough, or making mistakes that in a last tense situation I would not have made. I also found that people had a tendency to misinterpret me when interacting with them. In a past job, I was essentially punished and stripped of duties due to not masking one day in a visit and misinterpreting my illness for anger. I was also berated for my lateness caused by increased traffic and my inability to adapt this to my routine. It took longer than the work was wanting, and that had an impact on our situation. In addition to this, requests for reasonable adjustments and good communication with my line manager were included. Sorry, I'll start the sentence again. In addition to this, requests for reasonable adjustments and good communication with my line manager, which included meeting notes with him, were ignored, despite it being covered in a dyslexia diagnosis I had. This treatment led to burnout and being off work for months. When I caught COVID for the first time, I had a rather severe reaction and suffered with post-viral fatigue for months after, which resulted in me deciding to leave the organisation and taking voluntary redundancy. After getting a job with the Trust, I moved into a completely different environment. Managers gave me a clear instruction and framework that allowed me to learn and develop successfully within the Trust. When my job role moved from one department to another during my probation period, I felt comfortable enough with the resources I'd been given to pass the probation confidently. This meant that throughout my time in my current role, I feel like whatever I have needed, support or resources from my manager, I've been in a position comfortable enough to ask for it. Having received glowing appraisals from my line managers over the last few years, I've been applying for various Band 3 positions within the Trust. Despite my ability to carry out the work, I still received the same feedback for jobs that, considering my skills, I started to ask why this was. Doing some research into my past, I discovered that I may suffer from some audio processing issues, as well as the speech impediment I knew I had as a child, this all exacerbating during interviews, meaning that I struggled to answer the questions in depth. This led to further research into my childhood, especially my diagnosis of dyslexia. I found out that this was a convenient label for the child psychologist to use to ensure my primary school could support me. Reading between the lines of the letter, it was likely that I could have neurodivergent traits, but they were not presented in a way that was recognised at the time. This led me, like many others of my age who have self-diagnosed, to seek a diagnosis late last year, which I'm still waiting to hear, and I will be put on a waiting list likely for a very long time. Since coming to this realisation, I've been seeking reasonable adjustments that would allow me to achieve my career goals. It's frustrating to have a system which rewards those who are better suited to that form of communication as opposed to carrying out the job, which can require some very different skills. This frustration has led to a drop in motivation in the past. What has not helped is that when I first started searching for support and suggestions on what reasonable adjustments could aid me, the Trust were not necessarily aware of what I could do to ensure that I could progress in my career. During the last year, I've been researching what I can do to help me with interviews. This includes obtaining the questions a few hours in advance so that I can process my answers and write them out. Learning that I could take special leave for this time too. Asking if I can send this plan to those that interview me in case I struggle with communicating. Having sessions of one-to-one interviews with the recruitment team to see how to improve my answers. Taking courses on interview skills and access to work courses on stress management. Joining the Enable network to communicate my experiences and communicating my experiences to whoever I can also helped. This personal development has certainly helped me, and it will be useful to see how this affects my job opportunities, but I am aware that others may struggle in the same way. I would suggest that it would be helpful to provide formal support for those who are like myself and struggle with interviews. Applying the recommendations made by the CIPD Guide on neurodiversity in the workplace would also be helpful. Whilst we've applied some aspects already as part of our disability confident employer status, I feel that there is more we can do to ensure that disabled people, especially those who are neurodivergent, succeed in the workplace. Sorry, I'm going to quickly take a drink. There's over 2,000 words here. Okay. Experience 2 is someone who has a physical disability that affects their mobility. When I arrive at work, my anxiety always goes up. I don't know what type of day I'm going to have, and working in a hospital, no 2 days are ever the same, especially in my kind of job, but that isn't what usually supplies my anxiety. My anxiety starts when I see people look at me a little bit funny, or the bolder of the bunch walk up to my car and inform me that I'm parked in a blue badge space. They are correct, I am parked in a blue badge space with a valid blue badge, but this isn't usually enough for people. And it isn't until they see me struggling to get out of my car and move around that they realise I probably need that space more than they do. Some apologise, some just walk away, but even when no one approaches me, it gets me very anxious. I haven't always had sufficient parking where I work, so the constant anxiety of will I get a space, will someone interrupt me trying to get out of my car, or even report me to security for parking here, is worth it to have the option of being able to get out of my car at work, and something I'm very grateful for. Inside the hospital, I tend to be much happier. People tend to be polite generally, and I love seeing children like me because I see their faces light up when they recognise my mobility aid and see someone like them living and working. They almost always come up and talk to me, and we have a nice chat. Parents are always lovely too. They don't talk to me weirdly like other people might. Other staff members are definitely the worst. When a patient or visitor pats me on the head or asks me a weird question, my NHS badge means I can't really say much back to them, so I tend to smile and walk away. This sometimes ends up with my manager having a conversation with me, but it doesn't go much further than that as they're very understanding. But when a staff member shouts at me that I'm in a staff-only corridor, or that I shouldn't be going that way, or that do I need help getting to an appointment, or my personal favourite, wow, I didn't know we employed people like you. Sometimes I argue back straight away, sometimes I play dumb and make them keep repeating what they are saying and ask why it is funny, which sometimes makes them realise what they are saying is a little bit bizarre. Though that doesn't always happen. Other times I take a picture of their name badge with the idea to report them to my manager, though I very rarely end up reporting people. It isn't worth the dirty looks that you can sometimes get if you see them in the corridor, because you were the person that called out their ableism. I do sometimes wonder if I left my mobility aid at the door and participated in meetings without it, what would happen? Would I be treated differently? Would I be more successful? Or would people start holding me to a higher standard? I don't really know what the answer would be, but I know every disabled person, no matter what their disability is, sits and feels that imposter syndrome sometimes, and like they shouldn't have the job that they do. I do think we're making a lot of progress. I think there are more tolerant people than intolerant people in the trust, and I think that most people understand my accommodations and don't just follow them because they have to, but because they are happy that I'm part of the conversation. This will always be amazing to me and something I'm very grateful of. I hope that the progress continues because there are so many talented disabled people in the trust who deserve to flourish in their job roles. I have some amazing colleagues who definitely share my sense of humour, the type of humour that would definitely get me into trouble if I wasn't careful, but they get it and that makes me feel very supported in my workplace. My ask and what I want you to take away from this is that we aren't very different at all. Don't judge us and don't jump to conclusions. Rather than moving in to grab something whilst asking if I want help, wait for the answer and then move depending on what the response is. Rather than shouting down a corridor, staff only here, walk up to us and ask to see our staff badge. If we don't have one, by all means, throw me out. But please don't jump to conclusions that we can't do what we do every day without your help. We've then got experience number 3, which is someone who's partially sighted. Working as a blind person is very unique. My job brings me great purpose, but also lots of challenges. It can be very tiring, but the fatigue is worth it when I feel like I've achieved something at the end of the day. The first thing people ask when they meet me is, how do you do that if you can't see? Sometimes people don't necessarily ask it, but I can see them thinking it in their head. I often laugh at the question, not because it's funny, but because I find it absolutely hilarious that people rely so much on one sense when I've never even had it to think about. It boosts my ego a little knowing that I'm cleverer than them. Sound is usually what I rely on to get around, but I also rely on my instinct a lot. It's amazing how much you can figure out about space or situation without looking. There are lots of noises in a hospital that can tell me whether something is going to be a good day or a bad day. When it's completely quiet, I know I need to panic. I think I'm very good at my job, and I think being blind makes me even better at it. I take a lot of pride in my achievements, but I don't always talk about them at work because it highlights what makes me different. Because I'm blind, people often miss other things about my personality. They don't see how funny I am and that I like to be the comedy person in the room. They don't see how many hours I spend reading and listening to audiobooks. And they don't see how many murder documentaries I've watched and tried to solve on Netflix, what I think to be very successfully. I enjoy being underestimated. It allows me to sit and get used to my surroundings before I start doing my job, and it allows me to suss people out. It allows me to see more than what others do, and I often see what you don't see just because of how closely I pay attention. I look forward to coming to work every day, and I look forward to being given the opportunity to show my strengths at work. I enjoy being me, and I enjoy my job. We've then got a small list of quotes coming from a variety of different people from different disabilities. And what I didn't say at the start is that this isn't just staff who contributed to this. We do have volunteers in our network as well, which we've worked quite hard to make sure we involve them in. So some of this may have come from volunteers as well. So, quotes. We've got, "You shouldn't be parked there. Everyone is a little bit autistic, you know. Should you be doing that if you can't see? Slow down, there's a speed limit in here. I don't know if I would bother working if I had that. Oh, aren't you very smart?" whilst doing something like pressing a lift button. "If you concentrated harder, you wouldn't need to extend the deadline. So what happened to you then? Can you do that somewhere else? I don't want to see that. This happens a lot when I'm checking my blood sugar in Ellaby's. I'm sorry, but I don't think you should have all these accommodations. It's unfair on the rest of us. My brother's best friend's dog's uncle's cousin, twice removed, had that. You know, if you do yoga, it'll go away. No, I'm not wearing that microphone. You can hear me just fine from here. You can't be that bad. You have a job. You must get loads of money off the government. I don't know why you bother working. I wish I had an excuse to get out of work too. It must be so nice to sit down all day. Just try harder." That is all of the experiences, and I think we don't know, well, you don't know the people that have contributed them, but I think they did really, really well to put it all down on paper and give me the opportunity to share it, and I was very grateful for that. So to the people who sent them in, thank you very much. We're really appreciative that you were willing to share your experiences with us.
Thank you, Azaria, for taking time out to read those experiences, and if you could thank the individuals that put them forward as well. There's something very powerful about hearing people's lived experiences and just sitting and listening and not asking any questions. I think it shows you what difference we can make as individuals when we hear people's lived experiences and reflect on those, and what we can do as a trust in terms of thinking about how we communicate with people, how we behave, how we can make sure that there are no microaggressions that impact on individuals, and something as taking time out to talk to our colleagues and those who report to us to understand how we can support them and make any necessary adjustments so that they can thrive in the workplace. So that's really important. So it was really useful and beneficial to hear those lived experiences. So thank you. So next we'll go on to well, we were going to take a break, but because we've not got Catherine present, we'll go on a little bit longer before we take a break. So we'll go on to Michael, who's thankfully come forward to share his experience. So thank you, Michael.
No problem. Just to kind of reflect on what Virginia and Azaria were saying about the stories, I kind of want to say that why I'm telling the story, I guess. And I always think that storytelling is kind of humanity's oldest ways of learning. And you can kind of imagine the cave people sitting around a fire, sharing tales of their experiences, like how to hunt, stay safe, and how to thrive, how to make fire, for example. And these stories weren't just entertainment, and they were vital tools for survival. And even today, those stories can be a powerful way to connect, teach, and kind of inspire. And they resonate with us because they're relatable, they're memorable. And when we hear people's stories, we don't just learn about the challenges and the successes, we feel them. And I'm choosing to share my story to kind of help frame the conversation around accessibility, disability, and by grounding kind of abstract concepts like equity, inclusivity in real experiences, I'm kind of hoping to make that tangible and meaningful in a way. For me, stories give us the why behind the what, and I think understanding that why is where change really begins. So my own journey might start with my own story, and I was born with a congenital sensorineural hearing loss, which is a really long way of saying I was born with a hearing loss, and it's classed as severe profound, and it's also a kind of reverse slope hearing loss, which essentially means that I struggle to hear lower frequencies, and unfortunately, the human voice does kind of sit within that lower frequencies. And I tend to have a harder time hearing male voices than I do female voices for that same reason. So a lot of my social circle and tends to be female. And that wasn't something that I realized until someone actually asked me about my experiences as someone with a hearing impediment, and started to explore that a bit further, and actually kind of realized that made sense. And I wasn't actually diagnosed, even though I was born with my hearing loss. I wasn't actually diagnosed until I was 9 years old, and so that was an interesting experience. And actually, I had no concept of being having a hearing loss. And why is that important from my work perspective? Well, one of the most frequent comments that I get from people is, I don't look deaf, I don't sound deaf, and I don't write deaf. And that was a really hard concept for me to understand. What does that mean? Well, do deaf people have a sound? And do they have a particular look? And is there a typical way that they write? And it wasn't until that I went to some staff events. There's a national staff network for people with hearing loss, deafness, and I went to that, and it was a conference, a physical conference meeting, and essentially just this entire NHS building full of people with hearing loss, and there wasn't a single typical person or way to experience it, but it was the first time as a deaf person I did not feel deaf. I didn't feel deaf enough to be there, and it was a really kind of difficult experience because I was experiencing, because my hearing loss is quite rare in terms of the typical hearing loss, if you like, and I always used to struggle with that. You don't sound deaf or you don't look deaf comments that I get, and actually it kind of played into I think as I was in experience too, I was talking about anxiety about turning up to work, and it wasn't until I was actually applying for a benefit to do with disability, filling out how much anxiety that I actually hold in my day-to-day life, and how much of things, simple little things, can induce that anxiety. The phone ringing, for example, unexpectedly. If I'm not expecting a phone call and my phone rings, that is an immediate anxious moment for me, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to understand who is on the other side of the phone. I don't know if they know about my hearing loss, because my main coping mechanism is lip speaking. And so when that phone rings, it's an immediate sense of dread. And the one thing that for me in the last few years, and particularly the pandemic, both heightened and also took away from my career, is the introduction of things like Microsoft Teams, which comes with captions. That unlocked a whole lot of opportunity for me in terms of being able to understand colleagues. But so the pandemic gave us that, but it also provided a bit of a barrier for me. As I said, my main coping mechanism is lip reading. And so with the pandemic, masks came about. So working in an NHS trust, I was working in Leeds at the time, and everyone had masks mandated. And that was a really tough experience for me, because I was just kind of like, no idea what people were saying. And sometimes you don't want to be the person that keeps saying, I'm really sorry, I can't understand what you're saying. You don't want to come across as ignorant or stupid in a way, I guess. And you don't want to feel like you're the problem. And that sometimes feeling like the problem can lead to that source of anxiety as well. And it was a really difficult time. And the other thing with that anxiety that comes up is if you're in a place that uses tannoys, waiting rooms in hospitals, for example, it's a really big one because they stand there and they shout your name. I've been left in ED, in the emergency department waiting room, start waiting whilst people come and go. People come with what I would assume are relatively minor things, and they're still being seen before me. And then it wasn't until I was like, okay, but I'm going to go and ask. And it's because usually there's signs that say, people we don't see people in the order that they arrive, we see people in the order of their illness. And I was still sat there, and I was kind of discouraged from asking, but eventually I plucked up the courage to ask, and they were like, oh yeah, we've been shouting your name for ages. And I'm like, I could not hear that whatsoever. So there's a really deep-rooted anxiety that I just assume is my everyday experience that everybody experiences, and it's really not. And being able to understand that has unlocked so much for me. And I think in terms of being able to share my story and actually say this is a problem, and how we kind of get out there in terms of being able to address that. And some of the challenges that I kind of face in a working environment are, for me, accents is a really hard challenge, because I'm there to do a job, and sometimes because we work in a really multicultural, diverse society, their accents are really hard to understand. So sometimes I have to hand over what it is that I'm helping them with because I can't understand them. And I try not to feel guilty about that, but in the sense that I'm still trying to help them by asking my colleague to assist them. But still, it's that kind of, how do I get through that? And doing things like that. When it comes to actually applying for the jobs as well, I've always found that I've been treated with, because I don't tend to disclose my hearing loss at interview stage or until the interview stage, because I don't feel like I need any accessible needs or anything like that. But actually the recruitment process, so ever since I was kind of like a teenager, I've always wanted to do public service jobs. I wanted to join the armed forces, for example, and I got told no. And I wanted to join the police, again, got told no. And actually one of the experiences I got told during the application for the police force was that, what if you don't hear someone sneaking up behind you? And I was like, well, the sneaking, not many people are going to be able to hit people sneaking behind them, regardless of whether they were of no hearing loss whatsoever. And actually, what you find is those same organisations, like the fire service, for example, if you apply to go, you'll go through the full application process, you get to the medical stage, and you fail the medical. But then what I found was that if I had been serving as a firefighter and then applied, so if I'd been serving as a firefighter with no hearing loss, and then as I got older, had a hearing loss and had to have hearing aids to correct my hearing, then they would treat me very differently. They would keep me in the job. They would redeploy me in, or they would work with me to do that. But if you're going in with an existing condition, they don't give you that same opportunity. And that's not that's not legal, as far as I can say. And sometimes you think, I'm going to fight this, I want to appeal this. And it's really hard because it's so energy sapping, and doing it by yourself, and you kind of feel like, what's the point? What am I getting out of this? Why am I kicking up all this fuss? It's really hard. It's again, and that anxiety creeping in. And but overall, my current work experience, I work in the business intelligence and insights team here at York, and my team are really understanding. They adapt their way of talking to me, which is really good. And they ask questions, which I think is important, because actually, where I sit, I make sure that I sit so I can see people approaching me, so that they don't have to come up behind me. Because if I don't hear them and then suddenly they're there talking to me and I'm not expecting them, if you're one of those people that kind of has the nervous disposition, you kind of get a jump scare. It happens a lot. And actually, I should probably do that when I work from home. My wife often walks in and she puts a hand on me and I'm not expecting it and gives me a jump scare. And I'm always like, stop sneaking up on me. And she's like, I'm not. I literally just walked in the door. But generally speaking, I don't mind someone touching me, putting their hand on my shoulder. But it's one of those things that requires a kind of pre-knowledge and consent. So I'm always happy to say, you know what, if I haven't heard you, just get my attention, put your hand on my shoulder. But I appreciate that that's not for everybody. And being able to get that difference between the kind of the nuances of what people need and what they're comfortable with is really important. And the other thing that I find really challenging as well is that I come into contact with people with a hearing loss, as someone with a hearing loss. And they have very different experiences from me. They're not aware of the same opportunities that are available, such as access to work, for example. And access to work has been a really good source of support for me in terms of opportunities. And there's sometimes a really misconception about access to work and what it is. And if you went to the Gem Turner listening event, you would know that sometimes people, the experiences are, you've cost me money to employ you. But access to work is there to try and offset that and provide the financial compensation to the organisation for supporting people in keeping that equal opportunities. And what a lot of people don't know is that if you apply for access to work within 6 weeks of starting your contract, a lot of that cost is actually 100% of the cost is actually taken up by access to work in a lot of situations. And that's there to try and encourage those conversations early on. So if you are a hiring manager within the trust, I would fully encourage you to have those conversations early on. If you notice that someone might benefit from access to work, have those discussions with them. There might be challenging conversations, but they are really important conversations to have, because the support that they can provide from access to work includes a grant towards having training within your team workplace, particularly dealing with a particular disability. So in my case, it's how to work with someone with a hearing loss. So it's kind of like that deaf awareness training for the team and organization in the immediate area. But they also have an assessment service where you can learn more about how you could particularly cope, because sometimes the new technology is coming out and evolving all the time, and being able to get things like streamers for telephones, Bluetooth telephones, and for face-to-face meetings, you can get like microphones that clip onto people, or you can put them in like a table microphone, and that kind of streams straight to your hearing aids. And there's so much technology out there that you might not be aware of that's aimed at improving the experience, if you like. And where I used to work, they used access to work to renew some really old equipment, because some people they'll get some equipment and they'll hold on to it for 5-10 years throughout their working career, not realizing actually they can apply to access to work for a review to get more up-to-date equipment. And that's an important thing as well, is that sometimes the equipment that we've got can be obsolete, and sometimes we struggle to either replace it or you keep it working if it breaks. So that financial support is really important. I've benefited from that so many times as well. And it is important to remember that technology isn't all that. And as much as I use captions on Microsoft Teams meetings, it is extremely useful, but sometimes the artificial intelligence translation, if you like, isn't quite as accurate as you might expect. And sometimes it just says things that don't make a lot of sense, so you have to have a lot of context as to what's going and apply context to what they're saying. And because sometimes you're like, I was definitely not talking about approving diarrhea bits, is one that came up once, and sometimes it's really hard to try and remain professional drawing whilst you're reading the captions, because it comes up with some really bizarre things, and if you're on camera like I am at the moment, to try and keep a straight face is really hard. So that's one. It's a humorous challenge to have, but it is still a challenge that technology still isn't all that, but it is getting better. I'm grateful for it. And I think that's it from my experience. So yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. Um, it shows you how many barriers that somebody can experience in all areas of their life, um, and how it impacts on you at work, but also on your health as well in terms of anxiety. And I think and anxiety is what's the common denominator in a lot of people's experiences. So, thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for sharing where things have been good as well, in terms of your colleagues in your current workplace and some of Teams as functionality. I know what you're talking about in terms of the live captions. There's times when I use live captions and I'm thinking, I'm sure they didn't just say that. So yeah, thank you. I think what's good about this event, and I know we haven't got that many people on the call, but this will go on staff room, and so people can hear it, and I think that's where the power of people's stories can touch other people and get them to think about other people's experiences. So yeah, I'm sure what you've just given us is probably just a snippet of your life, um, because I'm sure you've got many more experiences as well. But thank you for that, Michael. So what we'll do now is just take a 10-minute break. So if we come back at 25 past, and then we'll continue with Claire, and Catherine's now joined us as well. So I'm going to turn my camera off, and I'll put it back on when it's 25 past. Thank you. That 10 minutes passed very quickly, didn't it?
Yeah, it always does.
Okay, we'll make a start. So now we'll move on to Claire. Thank you, Claire, for volunteering to share your experience with us, and I'll hand over to you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me all right?
We
Excellent.
can.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk and share my experience. So, like Michael, I have sensory neuro hearing loss to a severe / profound degree. So very much mirrored in that sense. My left ear is classified as a dead ear, which is a really nice medical term to be described as, but that means it's beyond profound. It does absolutely nothing. So I completely rely on my right ear. And my hearing loss, like Michael, is based on frequencies. So I have lost higher frequencies and lower frequencies, but have in general kept the frequency of the human voice, which I feel very lucky to have done. And they don't really know why I've lost my hearing. So I was born with some degree of hearing loss, not as severe as I am now. And at the time, I didn't require hearing aids. And I went through school and had yearly hearing tests because they don't know the reason why my hearing lost in the first place. And it kept fluctuating. And my hearing has fluctuated throughout my life. And in 2013, in the final year of teacher training, I woke up one day and had lost a huge amount of hearing, which was incredibly scary and frightening. And again, blood tests, MRIs, CTs, no idea why it's happened. And that means that they also can't predict my future. You know, am I going to lose absolutely everything I have because I already have absolutely nothing in my left ear? And there are other places for hearing technology. So I am a hearing aid wearer now. We talked about something called a cochlear implant, but because I have nothing else in one ear, they usually pick your weakest ear, but they can't do anything with my weakest ear. So it would be a gamble because if it didn't work in my right ear, I would be at high risk of being completely deaf. And that would have a huge impact on my livelihood. So as I said, I had that huge loss whilst I was in my final year of teacher training. And it was whilst I was on my final teacher training placement. At the time, I was on track for a first class degree, and I'd had letters from the head of the programme because I'd had commendation feedback from my placement schools. And I was actually specialising in special needs in a pilot programme. And that all went down the dustpan when that happened. Because, again, mirroring to Michael's story, I was sent to occupational health and they said that I would be a health and safety risk within the classroom and children need to be heard. Therefore, they would not pass my occupational health to get qualified teacher status. So I now have a degree in primary education, but I'm not allowed to teach because I'm a health and safety risk. But had that hearing loss happened 6 months later, once I'd already got qualified teacher status, I would have been, they'd have just put reasonable adjustments in place there could have been a TA in the classroom. That's probably about all I needed, because of how lucky I've been with my hearing loss, that I can mostly hear the human voice. And like Michael, very low speakers just don't exist. So yeah, that was absolutely devastating. I'd always dreamed of being a teacher. That was what the vocation inside me. So I spent a year working in rock climbing wall because I didn't know what to do, and I had a friend who happened to own a rock climbing wall. And then I went, well, how can I use my teacher training? And I thought, I'll do learning development. I was the only person who signed up to the course for learning development, so I ended up falling into HR. And I worked in HR up until now. I'm now a project manager within the trust. So it was a very rocky start to what was meant to be my career trajectory. And I think a lot of what Michael said really mirrored with what I had to say, was that actually I've really struggled with my deaf identity because I don't feel as deaf enough as other people. And one of those times that I didn't feel deaf enough, as you'll see by the pictures, I have a hearing dog. And it was my husband that encouraged me to apply for the hearing dog. And I go, I'm not deaf enough. I'm not deaf enough for a hearing dog. There's people far more worse off than me. And he's like, what have you got to lose by applying? They accepted me straight away. And I think that really helped me come to terms with my deaf identity and actually realise that I do have needs, I do have access needs. And one of the things that prompted my husband to make me apply for a hearing dog was I was in a supermarket, the fire alarm went off. I didn't know the fire alarm went off until I saw a load of abandoned trolleys and was like, what's going on? Walked outside and the fire engine. No one knew I was in there. And that really spooked me. And one of my biggest fears prior to having Molly, who's my hearing dog, was being at home alone, and particularly overnight at home alone, because if my alarm went off and there was a fire, I wouldn't know, and that scared me. And it wasn't until I got Molly that I had ever spent a night alone in my own home. Full stop. So that took me until I was like 27 to be alone in a house on my own, and that feels like quite a significant thing as an adult to have that realization. And the other thing that I've really struggled with is to advocate for myself. I would say I'm not a naturally forthright person. I would, let other people go first. It's fine. I'll sit back. But actually having to advocate for yourself and having to say, actually, at work, you're going to a meeting room, I need to sit there so that I can see as many faces as possible so I can read people's lips. And if I don't do that, I could end up in a space and then I'm missing half the meeting and I don't know what's going on. But actually being a real journey for me professionally to advocate for myself in those situations. And I think I've been very lucky in my working life that I have had really good managers that have really encouraged me to advocate for myself and ask me what my needs are. And I do absolutely think part of that is down to Molly, because she literally says Claire is deaf on her jacket. I've had similar comments to Michael. Well, you don't sound deaf, you don't write deaf, and you don't look deaf. And he's like, well, what do you expect me to do? I'm a success story of speech and language therapy. Would you like me to have not had that? A very strange situation to be in. And Molly is definitely, sorry, she's just down there. Definitely being part of the journey of making people aware and Pre-Molly, I'd be in the street and people have said, oh, excuse me, I've not heard them. And they just elbow you out the way. And that makes you feel really like vulnerable, really. It could make, it'd be so easy for me to just decide not to do things. And particularly in COVID, like Michael was saying, when people had masks, I would definitely take the seat and go, you go and speak to them, to my husband. Because I'm not going to understand what they say back. And I think one of the things for me is I need context for a conversation so that I can lip read effectively. And if I don't have the full context, I just guess what people say. And it's like you hear every fourth word. I could only say that's the way of liking it. So I will answer a question with what I thought you said, but it might not actually be what you said. And I'd say, we talk about anxiety, going to somewhere like Subway, where you have to pick what you want on your sandwich, but you don't know which one they're going to ask you next. I just keep guessing. And, they might have said, do you want mayonnaise? And I've said, tomatoes, please. And they just look at you like you're bonkers. Because, again, technology is great, but now you can't see my hearing aid. So without Molly, there's nothing showing you that she's deaf. She might need you to repeat yourself. She might not quite get what you're saying. She's going to guess what you're saying. I would say for the trust, I have had the most amazing experience of joining an organisation who have been ever so accommodating, incredibly enthusiastic about someone coming with a dog, I have got to say. So I think Molly is almost a bit of a celebrity because people stop me in the corridor and say, can I say hello? And then they will ask me questions about myself and the dog. And I feel like it gives you that opportunity. People are interested and it's really, really refreshing. Everyone's been really welcoming, and there can be times when, as a deaf person, you feel really stupid because you stood there going, I have no idea what's going on. But I've really found that I don't need to advocate for myself here. People come and say, what do you need? Can I help you? Do you need me to sit at the front? Can I get you a microphone when you're in whatever situation you're in? That wasn't right. Shall we sort that out? And that attitude to someone living with a disability just makes your life so much easier, is in terms of people being confident enough, I think, to say, can you tell me what your needs are, rather than hiding behind it. And I think the other thing that I would say in terms of living with my disability in a working world is, and people not realising, I have to work really hard to understand Teams, or when I'm in a meeting, because I'm either reading constantly and I'm a little two step behind, or in a meeting and I'm lip reading and moving constantly. The fatigue. So we get like listening fatigue. So by the end of the day, if it's a particularly meeting heavy day, I am exhausted. And there's research that if you are deaf, it takes you longer to process what somebody has said. So you might hear, and I might read the words, so whether it's a written word or whether it's what I am hearing through my hearing aid, processing what it says and then going, okay, so what do I need to do from that? That's really tiring. And I feel like York and Scarborough are a place where I feel so confident to go up to people after the meeting and say, this is what I think I heard, is that right? And I think that's something to really be celebrated, that we are such a welcoming organisation from the experience that I've had. So I just wanted to share some positivity and how amazing Molly is. So she's the fire alarm, she's the doorbell, she's the baby monitor, she's the telephone, and she is an advocate by just being by my side. So that's all I have to say, because I know we've only got 5 minutes to go.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for sharing your experiences, and also you're relatively new to the trust as well, aren't you? So thank you for highlighting how some of your experiences in employment have been positive. Thank you. So we've just got a few moments left, Catherine. So are you able to share your story in a couple of minutes? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Go to you then. There you go. Over to you, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my story in terms of having a daughter that has cerebral palsy and how I'll be able to navigate through getting employment and still be in employment. I want to say being a mother to a 15-year-old girl with cerebral palsy has been an amazing journey for me. I got into the UK 2022 September. I came here as a student to study biomedical science, master's level. And when I got into the UK, I discovered that it is a place where I could bring my daughter over so she could be around me while I study because I left her back in Nigeria. And in my country where I'm coming from, there's this kind of stigmatization when you have a child with disability, and that really made me to like I want to stand for my child. I want to be an advocate for her, and I brought her over to the UK. So in the course of my studies, I took her to the mainstream school, and she got enrolled there, and thankfully some of the teachers were able to assess her and told me that she really needs to be in a special school. At the end of the day, she was admitted into Apple Feeds, and it has really been an amazing journey. What we wanted for her was what we actually got. They have enough facility, learning aids, and it was really, really amazing. And that made me to be able to concentrate in my studies. In the long run, I got an appointment with the NHS, and it really opened my eyes because the way they gave me some forms to fill during the documentation period, and I was asked if I have anything that could hinder me for not doing my job properly, and I was able to state that I have a child that I care for, and I discovered that nobody looked at it and felt, oh, I don't need to do this job, or I'm not fit to do this job because it's a big responsibility to have a child with a disability. And it was just so supportive that I begin to feel, I think I would love to remain here in the NHS, to work for the NHS because of the support I got. And in the long run, I was able to get a dream job, which I'm doing right now. And my manager has been very, very supportive. I advocate. I always tell them, I always tell anybody that come across me that I've got a child with cerebral palsy. I'm no longer ashamed that I have a daughter, and I'm doing my job with so much joy because I got the support, and I know that everyone around me, even my employers, they are aware that I have a child with cerebral palsy. And over time, I've come to discover that when you tend to keep some things to yourself and people around you are not aware of what is happening to you, you tend to be isolated, and sometimes you just can't even strive properly in that work environment. So being in the NHS in terms of employment, in terms of disability, diversity, and inclusion, I think I am impressed, and I'm very happy that I was able to come out to talk about having a child that got cerebral palsy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Really touched by you sharing your experience. Yeah, sorry, getting emotional. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really important that you've had that opportunity to share that, and it's amazing that you've had such a good experience, and it contrasts, to the country that your country of origin, and how you're able to thrive and give to the NHS, but also support your daughter, and how you're proud of her. It's just wonderful. So yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. It's really, really powerful. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who shared their experiences today. And thank you to Andy for opening the event. There is a video which was created by staff at Hull Teaching Hospitals. Some of you have already got it. It's only a short video, but I've taken down the names of the people who haven't, so I will email the presentation out after today so you can play the video. It's a good summary of what we've just heard today. It does focus on the negative parts of being disabled, but as we've heard from Catherine and Claire, there are positives that we can take from this as well. I think it's really important that we continue to have that courage to advocate for ourselves, but also to encourage others to open up about their how they are disabled within society and within employment, so we can try and improve the culture of the organisation, so everybody can make sure that we work towards disability equality, whether that's through the systems and practices we put in place, or how we actually treat our colleagues. So thank you for coming along to the event today, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of the slides, and hopefully in the new year the recording will be on staff room so you can tell your colleagues about it. But thank you for participating, and have a good afternoon. Do something nice. Thank you.